played clips from my exclusive interview with President Biden on Friday, but we've saved the best for last. Listen as President Biden describes how he thinks Vice President Kamala Harris is doing and just why he called himself Old Joe Biden when he called my Aunt Gloria. We're at Delaware State University, HBCU in your home state. And of course, it makes me think probably the most preeminent HBCU graduate in the United States, the Vice President of the United States, Vice President Harris. How's she doing? You're almost 2 years in. How's she doing?
She's doing great. She is first of all, she's smart as hell. She has a backbone like a ramrod, and she has enormous integrity. And but if you take a look out there, there isn't any public figure that is, 60% favorable ratings. I mean, most of but she is doing a great job, and she is really, really thoroughly informed, and particularly on areas of foreign policy and national security issues. And so I find her to be extremely, extremely well qualified and a great asset. We have lunch once a week, and there's nothing that she is cut off from. We engage her in everything, but I think she's doing a great job.
Since we're on a college campus, you gave a speech about college affordability, your student loan program, which got a couple of wins yesterday with cases, the judges ruling in your program's favor. In addition to that, Mr. President, you also did that blanket pardon for people with federal charges of simple marijuana possession. The commentary is you did this as a way of getting the youth vote. Do you think that's going to work?
I got over 60% of the youth votes last time, and I didn't do that. But here's what it is. It's not what's going to work, it's what's fair. The idea that someone would sit in a federal prison for the possession and use, not the sale to minors, not the trafficking, not just possession, and sit in a federal prison makes no sense to me. None. And it just, anyway, so I've been thinking about this for a long time and done a fair amount of research on whether or not just the mere use of marijuana, I'm not talking about legalizing, just the use of it, is so detrimental. And the idea of putting someone in prison, and what happens is, Jonathan, everything about their background gets put on hold. They can't borrow money, they can't buy a house, they can't, because they have a record. They've been in a federal prison. So it's not just to let them out of prison, wipe the record clean. Wipe it clean. There's no rationale, in my view, for someone and thousands of young people being in a situation where they are put behind the 8 ball the rest of their life because they've used marijuana.
Mr. President, I can't be with you and not ask you a question concerning my Aunt Gloria, who you may recall was your biggest fan in 2020 because she said, going to need an old white dude to go after to take on an old white dude. But when I asked her if you should run for re-election, and still, she loves you, but she said she's not sure that you should, given your age. That with the one caveat, that if Donald Trump runs again, you absolutely have to run again. So let's say Trump doesn't run again. Convince Aunt Gloria that she should stick with you.
Well, I think Aunt Gloria should take a look. I think it's a legitimate thing to be concerned about anyone's age, including mine. I think that's totally legitimate. But I think the best way to make the judgment is to watch me. Am I slowing up? Don't have the same pace as her? And that old joke, everybody talks about the new 70s, 50s, and all that stuff. It could be, I'm a great respecter of fate. I could get a disease tomorrow. I could, drop dead tomorrow. But in terms of my energy level, in terms of how much I'm able to do, I think people should look and say, does he still have the same passion for what he's doing? And if they think I do and I can do it, then that's fine. If they don't, then they should vote against me. Not against me, they should encourage me not to go. But that's not how I feel. I can't even say the age I'm going to be. I can't even get it out of my mouth. I can't. I mean, I swear to God, it's like, no, come on, that can't be true. And you think I'm joking? You know I'm not joking.
I know you're not joking.
it's just strange. But I think Aunt Gloria should just take a real hard look, and if she concludes that I'm missing a beat, then she should, support some other Democrat if they decide to run. But Jonathan, right now, knock on wood, don't want to jinx myself. I'm in good health. All of everything physically about me is still functioning well. So, and mentally too. So, but I understand people wanting to ask that question.
Which is the better job, senator or president?
There's only one reason, I think, to be in public life. I really mean it. Can you make life better for other people? And there's no place that you have a better opportunity to do that than as President of the United States. The difference between being president and being a senator, even a quote important senator, chairman of committees and all of that, is that nothing gets to the president that hadn't gotten to him because it's been.
Perhaps the most consequential midterm elections in memory are 16 days away, and the nation is going through it. Record inflation, the pandemic still stalks us, and a feisty Republican Party poised to bring election denialism and other retrograde ideas to an elected office near you. So it's no wonder the new NBC News poll released this morning shows that 71% of voters say the country is headed in the wrong direction for the 6th time in the last 7 polling sessions. But through it all, President Joe Biden's approval rating has held steady at 45%. I sat down with the president in an exclusive interview on Friday in his home state of Delaware at the HBCU, Delaware State University.
Mr. President, thank you very much for being here.
Happy to be with you.
Mr. President, I'll be honest. I'm scared. Millions of Americans are scared. They're concerned about the concerted attacks on democracy, on voting, and how that's going to impact the midterm elections. We're seeing everything from Governor DeSantis's election police force arresting people for alleged violations of voter fraud. We're seeing election workers quitting because of threats. And then on top of it, you've got election deniers up and down the ballot running for election. A good chunk of them could win. So why shouldn't we be scared?
Well, I think we should be concerned. Look, there's nothing automatic about democracy. Remember when you're in undergraduate school, they talk about every generation has to protect democracy. Well, it really does. And I think we're at one of those inflection points in history where we've reached a point where there has been such a division that you have what I call the mega hadn't got to him because it's been.
It's about fighting for the working families and the middle class. It is not about vicious attacks on other people.
Senator, when you say that you disown these attacks and you didn't personally direct them, I believe you.
Well, thank you.
But at a certain point, you got to ask yourself, why did this pattern arise? Why is it especially the case among your supporters?
I don't think it is especially the case, by the way.
That's just not true. Look,
well,
people know.
Pete, if you want to talk to some of the women on my campaign, what you will see is the most ugly, sexist, racist attacks that are, I won't even describe them here. They're so disgusting. And let me say something else about this, not being too paranoid. All of us remember 2016. And what we remember is efforts by Russians and others to try to interfere in our election and divide us up. I'm not saying that's happening, but it would not shock me. I saw some of those tweets regarding the Culinary Workers Union. I have a 30-year, 100% pro-union voting record. Do you think I would support or anybody supports me would be attacking union leaders. It's not thinkable.
But leadership is about what you draw out of people. It's about how you inspire people to act. And right now we're in this toxic political environment. Leadership isn't just about policy. I think, at least in broad terms, we're largely pulling in the same direction on policy. But leadership is also about how you motivate people to treat other people. And I think you have to accept some responsibility and ask yourself what it is about your campaign in particular that seems to be motivating this behavior more than others. Because in order to turn the page on the Trump era, we're going to need a president, not just a candidate who can win, but a president who can move us forward.
Stop sexism on the internet. We could nominate a woman for candidate for President of the United States. I think that might go a long way if we showed our stuff as a party. And the other thing I want to talk about is really what is at the core of this issue between Senator Sanders and the Culinary Union. And that is this. These are hardworking people, housekeepers like Elizabeth and I met with last night, who have health care plans that have been negotiated over time, sweat and blood. And that is the truth for so many Americans right
Senator,
now.
thank you.
There are 149 million Americans that would lose their current health insurance
Senator Klobuchar,
under
thank you.
Senator Sanders' bill.
Senator,
that's
thank
what
you.
it says on page 8, and I don't think we should forget that.
On that note, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Chuck Todd.
Senator Sanders, I'm going to stay on this topic, on the culinary, on this issue with the Culinary Union. Obviously, their leaders are warning their members about that your health care plan will take away their health care plan, take away private insurance completely. There are some Democrats who like you a lot, but worry that this plan, Medicare for All, is going to take away private insurance and that it goes too far. Are they right?
No. Let me be very clear. 2 points. For 100 years, from Teddy Roosevelt to Barack Obama, this country has been talking about the need to guarantee health. Care for all people. And yet today, despite spending twice as much per capita, Chuck, twice as much as any other major country on earth, we got 87 million who are uninsured or underinsured.
Have said a vaccine is coming soon, within weeks now. Your own officials say it could take well into 2021 at the earliest for enough Americans to get vaccinated. And even then, they say the country will be wearing masks and distancing into 2022. Is your timeline realistic?
No, I think my timeline is going to be more accurate. I don't know that they're counting on the military the way I do, but we have our generals lined up, one in particular that's the head of logistics. And this is a very easy distribution for him. He's ready to go as soon as we have the vaccine. And we expect to have 100 million vials. As soon as we have the vaccine, he's ready to go.
Vice President Biden, your reaction, and just 40% of Americans say they would definitely agree to take a coronavirus vaccine if it was approved by the government. What steps would you take to give Americans confidence in a vaccine if it were approved?
Make sure it's totally transparent. Have the scientists of the world see it, know it, look at it, go through all the processes. And by the way, this is the same fellow who told you this is going to end by Easter last time. This is the same fellow who told you that, don't worry, we're going to end this by the summer. We're about to go into a dark winter. And he has no clear plan, and there's no prospect that there's going to be a vaccine available for the majority of the American people before the middle of next year.
President Trump, your reaction, he says you have no plan.
I don't think we're going to have a dark winter at all. We're opening up our country. We've learned and studied and understand the disease, which we didn't at the beginning. When I closed and banned China from coming in heavily infected, and then ultimately Europe, but China was in January. Months later, he was saying I was xenophobic. I did it too soon. Now he's saying, oh, I should have, moved quicker. But he didn't move quicker. He was months behind me, many months behind me. And frankly, he ran the H1N1 swine flu and it was a total disaster, far less lethal, but it was a total disaster. Had that had this kind of numbers, 700,000 people would be dead right now, but it was a far less lethal disease. Look, his own person who ran that for him, who, as you know, was his chief of staff, said it was catastrophic, it was horrible, we didn't know what we were doing. Now he comes up and he tells us how to do this. Also, everything that he said about the way every single move that he said we should make, that's what we've done. We've done all of it. But he was way behind us.
Vice President Biden, your response.
My response is he is xenophobic, but not because he shut down access from China. And he did it late after 40 countries had already done that. In addition to that, what he did, he made sure that we had 44 people that were in there in China trying to get to Wuhan to determine what exactly the source was. What did the president say in January? He said, no, he said, he's being transparent. The president of China is being transparent. We owe him a debt of gratitude. We have to thank him. And then what happened was we started talking about using the Defense Act to make sure we go out and get whatever is needed out there to protect people. And again, I go back to this. He had nothing. He did virtually nothing. And then he gets out of the hospital and he talks about, don't worry, it's all going to be over soon. Come on. There's not another serious scientist in the world who thinks it's going to be over soon.
President Trump, your reaction?
I say over soon. I say we're learning to live with it. We have no choice. We can't lock ourselves up in a basement like Joe does. He has the ability to lock himself up. I don't know. He's obviously made a lot of money someplace, but he has this thing about living in a basement. People can't do that. By the way, I, as the president, couldn't do that. I'd love to put myself in the basement or in a beautiful room in the White House and go away for a year and a half until it disappears. I can't do that. And Kirsten, every meeting I had, and I'd meet a lot of families, including Gold Star families and military families, every meeting I had, and I had to meet them. I had to. It would be horrible to have canceled everything. I said, this is dangerous. And you catch it. And, I caught it. I learned a lot. Great doctors, great hospitals. And now I recovered. 99.9% of young people recover. 99% of people recover. We have to recover. We can't close up our nation. We have to open our school, and we can't close up our nation, or you're not going to have a nation.
And of course, the CDC has said young people can get sick with COVID-19 and can pass it. Vice President Biden, I want to talk broadly about strategy, though.
Can I respond to that?
30 seconds, please, and then I have a question.
No, number one, he says that we're learning to live with it. People are learning to die with it. You folks home will have an empty chair at the kitchen table this morning. That man or wife going to bed tonight and reaching over to try to touch out of habit where their wife or husband was, is gone. Learning to live with it. Come on. We're dying with it because he has never said, you said it's dangerous. When's the last time? Is it really dangerous still? Are we dangerous? You tell the people it's dangerous now? What should they do about the danger? And you say, I take no responsibility.
Let me talk about your two.
Excuse me, I take full responsibility. It's not my fault that it came here. It's China's fault. And you know what? It's not Joe's fault that it came here either. It's China's fault. They kept it from going into the rest of China for the most part, but they didn't keep it from coming out to the world, including Europe and ourselves.
Vice President Biden.
The fact is that when we knew it was coming, when it hit, what happened? What did the president say? He said, don't worry, it's going to go away. Be gone by Easter. Don't worry. The warm weather. Don't worry. Maybe inject bleach. He said he was kidding when he said that, but a lot of people thought it was serious. A whole range of things the president has said. Even today, he thinks we are in control. We're about to lose 200,000 more people.
President Trump.
Look, perhaps just to finish this, I was kidding on that, but just to finish this, when I closed, he said I shouldn't have closed. And that went on for months. Nancy Pelosi said the same thing. She was dancing on the streets in Chinatown in San Francisco. But when I closed, he said, this is a terrible thing. You're xenophobic. I think he called me racist even. And because I was closing it to China. Now he says I should have closed it earlier. It just, Joe, it doesn't work.
I didn't say either of those things.
You
I didn't
certainly
say
did.
sugar
You
coercion,
certainly
and I
did.
I talked about a xenophobia in a different context. It wasn't about closing the border to Chinese coming to the United States.
All right, I want to talk about both of your different strategies to handling
He thought
this.
I shouldn't have closed the border.
Well,
That's obvious.
Do you want to respond to that quickly, Vice President
No.
Biden? Okay. Let's talk about your different strategies toward dealing with this. Mr. Vice President, you suggested you would support new shutdowns if scientists recommended it. What do you say to Americans who are fearful that the cost of shutdowns, the impact on the economy, the higher rates of hunger, depression, domestic and substance abuse outweighs the risk of exposure to the virus?
What I would say is I'm going to shut down the virus, not the country. It's his ineptitude that caused the country to have to shut down in large part. Why businesses have gone under, why schools are closed, why so many people have lost their living, and why they're concerned. Those other concerns are real. That's why he should have been, instead of in a sand trap in his golf course, he should have been negotiating with Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Democrats and Republicans about what to do about the acts they were passing for billions of dollars to make sure people had the capacity.
But you haven't ruled out more shutdowns.
Well, no, I'm not shutting down the neighbor, but there are, look, you need standards. The standard is if you have a reproduction rate in a community that's above a certain level, everybody says, slow up, more social distancing, do not open bars and do not open gymnasiums, do not open until you get this under control, under more control. But when you do open, give the people the capacity to be able to open and have the capacity to do it safely. For example, schools. Schools, they need a lot of money to open. They need to deal with ventilation systems. They need to deal with smaller classes, more teachers, more pods. And he's refused to support that money, or at least up to now.
Let's talk about schools. President Trump,
I think we have to respond, if I might.
please, and then I have a follow-up.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. Look, all he does is talk about shutdowns, but forget about him. His Democrat governors, Cuomo in New York, you look at what's going on in California, you look at Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Democrats all, they're shut down so tight and they're dying. They're dying. And he supports all these people. All he talks about is shut.
The name of the case is appropriately Donald J. Trump versus United States of America. And that really is what this is. But in that case today, the United States of America turned the tables by filing a motion asking, but really demanding, that the judge in the case reverse her recent ruling. And so for at least the next week or so or more, this case has become the United States of America versus Judge Aileen Mercedes Cannon, who stands accused, in effect, in the Justice Department filing today of committing judicial malpractice in her last ruling in the case, in which she issued an order requiring a so-called special master, to be named later, to review all of the evidence in the case, including classified documents, to decide which of those documents should just be returned to Donald Trump. The documents were all seized by the FBI executing a search warrant at Donald Trump's Florida club, which he has abandoned for the summer season. But before leaving there, he left 100 classified documents there while he was gone, along with 11,000 pages of government documents that belong to the United States of America, not Donald Trump. In court proceedings, it is common for all deadlines to be imposed on the lawyers by the judge in the case. But today, Justice Department lawyers imposed a deadline on the judge in this case. Now, you can watch courtroom proceedings for a very long time and not see lawyers tell a judge, if you don't do what we are telling you to do within a week, we are going over your head. And that's exactly what the Justice Department did today in this extraordinarily powerful filing in federal court in Florida, after first filing a one-sentence statement saying the Justice Department will appeal the judge's order of a special master in the case. The Justice Department immediately followed that up with a demand that Judge Cannon stop her own order right now. The Justice Department asked for a partial stay of the judge's order pending the appeal. A stay simply means a pause until the appeal is complete. The Justice Department's motion says the government seeks a stay to the extent the order, one, enjoins the further review and use for criminal investigative purposes of records bearing classification markings that were recovered pursuant to a court-authorized search warrant, and two, requires the government to disclose those classified records to a special master for review. If the court does not grant a stay by Thursday, September 15th, the government intends to seek relief from the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So the Justice Department is saying that they have no problem with the part of the judge's order that requires a special master to examine documents possibly privileged by the attorney-client privilege. But the Justice Department is saying there is absolutely no reason for a special master to ever look at any of the classified records that were seized by that search warrant. The Justice Department is also saying that the judge's order to the FBI to stop its criminal investigation concerning those records is improper and a danger to the United States of America. The judge's order allowed what she called the intelligence community, without quite knowing what the intelligence community is, to conduct its own review of the documents. But at the same time, the judge ordered the FBI to stop any of their investigation involving the documents seized by the search warrant. The Justice Department conducted a kindergarten class on national security in its motions today for the judge, explaining to the judge, quote, the intelligence community's classification review and national security risk assessment are inextricably linked with the criminal investigation. The filing points out that the FBI is part of the intelligence community, which is clearly something that Judge Cannon did not know until today. The Justice Department taught the judge, quote, the connection between the national security and criminal investigative aspects of this matter are grounded in the dual mission of the FBI. That is, the FBI itself is part of the United States intelligence community. And since the 9/11 attacks, the FBI has integrated its intelligence and law enforcement functions when it exercises its national security mission. That elementary education on the FBI's role in national security was explained to the judge in a statement by Alan Kohler Jr., who is the Assistant Director of the Counterintelligence Division of the FBI. Alan Kohler explained to the judge that her order makes it impossible for him to do his job. He said, I am also responsible for the protection of classified national security information and processes within the division, including information in the division possession as a result of investigative efforts. I am responsible for the protection of classified national security and law enforcement sensitive information. The FBI is the only intelligence community element with a full suite of authorities and tools to investigate and recover any improperly retained and stored classified information in the United States. The FBI is critical to the whole of government effort to address any national security risks at issue in this case. The same senior Department of Justice and FBI officials, such as myself, are ultimately responsible for supervising the criminal investigation and for ensuring that the FBI is coordinating appropriately with the rest of the intelligence community on its classification review and assessment. The FBI's Assistant Director of the Counterintelligence Division told the judge irreparable harm to the national security would result from enjoining the further review and use of records bearing classification markings for criminal investigative purposes. There's the FBI's top expert on investigations involving classified material telling the judge that she is right now, tonight, doing irreparable harm to national security because she has already stopped not just the FBI criminal investigation, but she has in effect stopped the intelligence community's review because the intelligence community does not know how to do the review without the FBI, and so they stopped doing the review. The Justice Department's lawyers, in their motion, made an absolutely irrefutable point over and over again. Quote, there is no justification for extending the injunction and special master review to the classified records. The Justice Department's motion made the point again and again that Donald Trump does not own the classified records. The United States government owns those records. The only reason for a special master to examine documents is to consider which documents should simply be handed back to the person who was searched because they don't belong in the investigation. The Justice Department's motion says repeatedly that Donald Trump, quote, has no right to the return of classified records which are not his property. Such records clearly belong in government custody and, as a matter of national security, must be fully accessible to the executive branch. The Justice Department's motion did not say, hey, we're talking about nuclear secrets here, because they can't reveal what they know about the information that was seized from Donald Trump. But the judge in this case knows that the Washington Post has reported this week that at least one of the top secret documents seized by the FBI with their search warrant was about the nuclear capability of another country, another country's nuclear secrets. The judge knows that Donald Trump took that highly classified information home where it was never in anything resembling a secure location and may have been in his desk drawer where the FBI did find classified information. And remember, after taking that information home to his winter home when he left the presidency in 2021, he left that home for the entire spring and summer and went north to a club in New Jersey, where he actually is this summer, too. Donald Trump taking nuclear secrets home after his presidency is bad enough and criminal enough. Donald Trump leaving them in that home after he leaves that home for the season 2 years in a row and for months on end, 2 years in a row, has no idea what's happening to those documents in those rooms in Florida, unlocked rooms. That is even crazier, and this judge knows that Donald Trump did that. And today, the Justice Department told this judge, it's on you. The risk to this country for all of that is now on you. Every delay in this investigation, which is an investigation of possible crimes, but also an investigation to protect the United States of America, every delay from now on is on this judge. That's what the Justice Department said today. The Justice Department told the judge today that what she has done already, quote, could preclude the government from taking necessary remedial steps in light of that review, risking irreparable harm to our national security and intelligence interests. The government will also suffer irreparable harm if it cannot review and use the classified materials as part of its criminal investigation, and if it is forced to disclose classified materials outside the executive branch in circumstances where there would be no valid purpose served by such disclosure. They mean there the disclosure of classified records to the so-called special master who the judge wants in the case, and who has absolutely no authority over classified records. No special master can possibly have any authority over classified material and could never, ever, under any circumstances, take a classified document out of the pile and hand it back to Donald Trump. This is the story of a Trump-appointed judge doing everything she possibly can to help Donald Trump and advance her judicial career in the Republican world. And as she was told by the Justice Department today, by doing that, she has done everything she possibly can in this case to harm the United States of America.
let me tell you the story of Victor Berger. He was an Austro-Hungarian immigrant to the United States, and in 1910, he became the first socialist member of the House, representing Wisconsin. Fifth District. He even introduced a bill to provide an old age pension to Americans over the age of 60. It didn't pass. But today we have something very similar called Social Security. After Berger lost his bid for re-election, he began writing editorials against the First World War in the newspaper he owned back in Milwaukee. And there was a huge backlash against him for it, all part of the first Red Scare, widespread anti-left hysteria across the country. Berger was indicted and convicted under the Espionage Act for, quote, disloyal acts. The Supreme Court ultimately overturned his conviction, but not before Congress blocked him from running again while under indictment. The House said, in effect, no, you are accused of being an enemy of the state, so there is no way we are letting you represent this government. A pretty serious move by Congress. He hadn't even been convicted yet. So, why am I telling you about a socialist from 100 years ago? Because Berger was blocked from running under a section of the US Constitution that disqualifies Americans from holding public office at any level if they have engaged in any effort to overthrow the US government. No, really. The 14th Amendment, Section 3, has been used again and again throughout American history. Berger was the last person to be successfully blocked from running for Congress under Section 3. But last week, a New Mexico judge disqualified County Commissioner Couy Griffin, the leader of a group called Cowboys for Trump, from holding public office because of Griffin's role in the January 6th insurrection. Yes, insurrection, a word the judge used. Just removed him from office, the first time that's happened since the end of the Civil War. By joining the mob and trespassing on restricted Capitol grounds, Mr. Griffin contributed to delaying Congress's election certification proceedings, the judge wrote. The ethics watchdog group, Crew, brought the suit against Griffin, presenting video evidence like this in court.
People are ready for fair and legal elections, or this is what you're going to get. You're going to get more of it.
Crew told radio host and MSNBC columnist Dino Badola they are taking a hard look at bringing a similar lawsuit against President Trump. So let's take a closer look at this specific part of our Constitution, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, that could, maybe, might be used to keep Donald Trump from launching a bid for re-election in 2024. It says, quote, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who having previously taken an oath to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. This clause right here, outlines the consequences for insurrectionists. Consequences that surely should be enforced, right? I mean, presidents and vice presidents and senators and members of Congress are all made to swear that they will uphold the Constitution of the United States. Well, Section 3 is in there, and it's a warning. It says if you're a rebel or an insurrectionist against the United States, you can't run for office. It's how Congress, in my view, very unreasonably and unfairly, blocked America's first socialist congressman, Victor Berger, during the first Red Scare. But it also, much more reasonably, was enforced by a judge last week against New Mexico County Commissioner Couy Griffin for participating in the January 6th insurrection. Did you know it almost happened to Madison Cawthorn as well? This spring, the far-right congressman from North Carolina faced a court challenge that argued his actions on January the 6th should keep him from running for re-election. But then he lost his primary in May, and all sides agreed to dismiss the case. The same voters' advocacy group that brought that case, Free Speech for People, also filed a legal challenge against a handful of lawmakers in Arizona based on what they called a reasonable suspicion they'd helped to facilitate the insurrection. It was ultimately dismissed. But they also filed a similar suit for the same reasons against Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia. That suit went to trial, where the hard-right congresswoman was made to answer under oath about the incendiary statements she had made leading up to January the 6th, as well as about any actions she had taken in relation to it. Here's a quick refresher on how her testimony went. Take a listen.
I don't remember.
Okay, so you're not denying it, you're just saying you don't recall.
I don't recall. I'm not answering that question. I don't remember. I don't remember. I don't recall making that tweet. I don't know anything about this. Never seen it before.
Funny how the same woman who calls Biden mentally incompetent seems to have such a faulty memory. A state judge ruled that Green could stay on the ballot, and Georgia's Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who had the final say, decided the conservative firebrand will be on the ballot this November. So, look, talk of the 14th Amendment is not some liberal, fantasy, pie-in-the-sky, idle nonsense. This is an active question in the courts right now, whether insurrectionists or those who incite them should be allowed to hold office, all based on the 14th Amendment, Section 3. Last year, in the immediate aftermath of the insurrection, Democratic Senator Tim Kaine and Republican Senator Susan Collins, in a bipartisan effort, used Section 3 in a bid to censure Trump for giving aid and comfort to the insurrectionists by repeatedly lying about the election, slandering election officials, pressuring others to come to Washington for a wild event, and encouraging them to come up to Congress. Because, of course, convicting Trump in the Senate for inciting the insurrection had failed, so Kaine and Collins were looking for some way, any way, to hold Trump to account. Hey, at least they tried. Around the same time in the House, Tennessee Democrat Steve Cohen introduced his own bill to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment for any member of Congress who participated in planning the insurrection. That bill hasn't made it out of committee. So, what's stopping groups like Crew or Free Speech for People from filing the same suits they've brought against members of Congress against Donald J. Trump as well? He's been impeached already for inciting the insurrection, for saying stuff like this.
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
But again, remember, Trump wasn't convicted in the Senate. He wasn't even censured by Congress. His actions in relation to January the 6th are still under investigation by the Department of Justice. In fact, just on Monday evening, we learned the DOJ has seized the phones of 2 of Trump's top advisors. Over the past week, it has issued 40 subpoenas as part of its investigation into January the 6th. Let's not also forget Mar-a-Lago. Trump is also under investigation for potential violations of the Espionage Act in relation to the FBI search of his Florida home/vanity purchase. So why shouldn't Section 3 of the 14th Amendment be applied to the guy who wants to run again for president, rather than only to the county commissioner in New Mexico who was acting in his name and with his encouragement? Look, the Constitution is not an a la carte menu. You don't get to pick and choose only the parts you like and leave the rest behind. And don't tell me, well, we don't know quite what Section 3 of the 14th Amendment means, or who can enforce it, or what the precedent is. Just look at what conservatives did with the Second Amendment. They changed its historic meaning. They made it the centerpiece of their political ideology. So if you're concerned about democracy and Donald Trump, yes, there's the DOJ's investigation, and the FBI search, and the 1-6 committee. But don't forget about Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Joining me now, Dean Obeidallah, host of the Dean Obeidallah Show on SiriusXM and a columnist for MSNBC Daily, and Charlie Sykes, editor-at-large of The Bulwark, also an MSNBC contributor and columnist. Thank you both for joining me. Dean, you make the case for using Section 3 of the 14th Amendment against Trump. Do you think it'll ever happen? Do you think the Trumpy Supreme Court would ever allow it to happen?
Look, we can't tell you where it's going to go in the whole system, but we can tell you this. Are you tired of waiting for the DOJ to act? Here's your chance to do something, folks. Sue him. Sue him in the states, and Crew, that organization, and other organizations will help you. If it gets to the Supreme Court and they overturn it, so be it. But the language of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, is pretty clear. And this New Mexico judge, while it's not Supreme Court, it's not binding precedent, is a well-reasoned, nuanced decision. He took testimony of an historic expert who talked about what insurrection meant under that and how this applied, that January 6th was an insurrection under that measure. And he defined what engaged it was. So look, file a lawsuit in state after state after state and let the courts decide. Just knock him off the ballot in a few key states and he can't win the electoral votes that he needs to win the electoral college.
Charlie, is there anything wrong with activist groups, with ordinary voters, as Dean says, wanting to enforce this constitutional provision against actual insurrectionists?
No, there's nothing wrong with trying. I mean, to be honest, I don't think it's a realistic option. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think it's an important discussion to have because I guess I'm in the camp of all of the above. And also, I think it's worth having this discussion because I think we have this urgent need to find a way to Trump-proof the Constitution and the rule of law. I think one of the things we're discovering is that many of the bulwarks that we thought had protected us against someone like Donald Trump turn out to be more suggestions than hard and fast rules. So by all means, pursue this. But I also would caution people, and you began with a cautionary tale about my fellow Milwaukeean Victor Berger, that a weapon like this can be misused.
Yes.
If in fact you pull this gun from the holster, don't be sure that the right will not use it against people on the left. So, you know, the one precedent is, in fact, very, very troubling because Victor Berger was an honorable man, still highly respected here in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee. And it's an example of what happens when you have something like the Red Scare. So, you know, I am very, very sympathetic to using every legal and constitutional tool available to hold Donald Trump accountable and to block him from ever returning to office. But we do need to be careful what we wish for. But again, this is a very valuable conversation because I do think there's a lot of things that the Congress needs to do, the Congress and the courts need to do in the short term to try to, Trump-proof our legal system.
First off, Trump-proofing the Constitution is a great title for your next book, Charlie. I would read that. Number two, Dean, respond to Charlie's point about how once you take this weapon out, it can be used by Republicans against Democrats in a bad faith way. And as loath as I am to play a clip from Tucker Carlson on this, just last night, Carlson was critiquing the judge's decision in New Mexico. Have a listen, Dean.
A state judge in New Mexico just removed an elected county commissioner from office, overturning the will of the voters. Why? Because he had dared to exercise his constitutional rights by participating in the election justice protest on January 6th. So this is a full-blown political purge.
Put aside Tucker Carlson's ridiculous and dishonest language. That line of argument will resonate with a lot of people, Dean. The will of the people's being overturned, that voters should decide who represents them, not judges using a 150-year-old, rarely used constitutional provision.
Don't do the crime if you don't want to do the time. It's that simple. Don't get involved in an insurrection. Don't try to overthrow our government. This commissioner it's not because he was the head of the Cowboys for Trump that he was removed. That's bad faith. What it was is that he was convicted of a crime, a misdemeanor for going in a restricted area. He was seen on video cheering the protesters as they beat police officers, and a police officer testified in his trial, one of the Capitol police officers who was beaten. Look, this was an attempt to overthrow our democracy. This is no different than obstructing Congress. It's a felony. But the irony here, Mehdi, is that Donald Trump could be charged, indicted, and sit in a prison cell and still run for office. We have no prohibition against people in a prison running for president, and the GOP would nominate the guy. This is the only way to keep him off the ballot. I mean, that's the truth. They nominate his approval. His numbers went up in a new poll. More Republicans want him now as the nominee than a month ago before the DOJ found classified documents. If he's indicted on this, it gives him more street cred. They love it. He's owning the libs. So look, do this. File a lawsuit. Folks, if you're looking for a chance, file a lawsuit against Trump if he announces. He's got to announce first.
Part of me thinks, don't be ridiculous. Trump couldn't run for president from prison. Part of me thinks, come on, we live in America in 2022. Anything is literally possible in our current storyline. Who knows what the writers will give us next? Charlie, Trump does have some serious legal troubles. On Monday evening, NBC News reported that the DOJ had issued 40 subpoenas in the past week relating to Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 vote. The DOJ also seized 2 telephones. Do you believe the DOJ, which has been criticized, including by me, for being slow on this, is now getting closer and closer to Trump himself, even though at the same time it's being reported that they almost certainly will not indict him this side of the midterms?
Yes, I think that, and I've shared your skepticism about Merrick Garland's aggressiveness in all of this, but there's no question about it that they're going after Donald Trump. They're going after the lies. They're going after the sedition. They're going after the grift on multiple fronts. And I think all of these areas need to be pursued. The predicate for your main question about the 14th Amendment, however, is that Donald Trump needs to be charged, indicted, and he needs to be convicted. Once that conviction takes place, Dean raises a very, very important point, that it is not inconceivable that Republicans would still nominate him, and it is not inconceivable that he would run. That's where I think you have an aggressive effort to, if in fact the charges do relate to the insurrection, to the sedition, that you do have an aggressive effort to apply the 14th Amendment. But that would only take place after he has been convicted. But once he's been convicted, I think that we need to use every single lever of the Constitution and of the law to affirm that no one is above the law, and that in fact this is a country of the law, and Donald Trump is not above the law.
Dean, 30 seconds left. I have to ask, no one's above the law, but where would you find 12 people to sit on a jury to convict Donald Trump?
I know 12 people off the bat, very easy. We're happy to convict Donald Trump. It's not hard finding 11 other people to convict this guy.
Trump's not going to like those particular jurors that you bring. I'm pretty sure Trump's going to object to the jurors you bring to his trial, if there's a trial. We'll have to leave it there. We'll have to leave it there. Dean, they'll have to go into hiding after the trial, Dean. Don't do that to your friends. On January the 6th, 1961, Vice President Richard Nixon had the not-so-fun task of presiding over Congress as it certified his very narrow and hugely controversial election loss to John F. Kennedy. But Nixon, perhaps one of the most crooked leaders in American history, at that point followed the rules. Even he abided by the result and did his constitutional duty.
This is the first time in 100 years that a candidate for the presidency announced the results of an election in which he was defeated and announced the victory of his opponent. I do not think that we could have a more striking and eloquent example of the stability of our constitutional system and of the proud tradition of the American people of developing and respecting and honoring institutions of self-government.
I mean, well said, Richard Nixon. Look, that's how January the 6th is supposed to work. The vice president presides over the electoral vote count, and that's it. That's what Vice President Mike Pence ultimately did do on January the 6th, 2021, despite incredible pressure from Donald Trump, a man who makes Nixon look like a Boy Scout, and from pressure from a violent insurrection where Pence's own bodyguards were concerned for their lives. This week, Congress is taking steps to clarify what the vice president can, but mostly can't do on January the 6th. The House could vote as early as Wednesday on a bill to reaffirm that the vice president's job during the electoral vote count is just to be a figurehead that oversees the counting process, not someone who can literally throw out electors. A similar bill with some bipartisan support is making its way through the Senate. Now, it's hard to imagine anyone actually could genuinely believe that the vice president had the authority to toss electoral votes. Just this week, we got more evidence that even Republicans who objected to Joe Biden's win on January the 6th, 2021, knew their objections were all for show. Just listen to this story from Congresswoman Liz Cheney, the Republican vice chair of the House January 6th committee, who said she was in the GOP cloakroom before the Capitol attack.
There were sheets of paper laid out on the desks. And I asked one of the staffers in the cloakroom, what are these sheets of paper? This person said to me, well, those are the objection sheets. There were so many who wanted to show they were objecting that they'd set up these sign-up sheets in the cloakroom. And as I was sitting there, a member came in and he signed his name on each one of the state's sheets. And then he said under his breath, the things we do for the orange Jesus. And I thought, you know, you're taking an act that is unconstitutional.
Orange Jesus, not my words, the alleged words of a reluctantly pro-Trump Republican member of Congress. Now, when Vice President Nixon was presiding over the vote count, he probably had more reasons than Donald Trump to be bitter about his election loss. As journalist Major Garrett and elections expert David Becker write in a new book, the election of 1960 was much closer than the one in 2020. Kennedy won by about 112,000 votes. Biden won by about 7 million votes. They note something else happened with relevance today. Kennedy appeared to have won Nixon's home state of California by roughly 37,000 votes when all precincts were reported. But when all absentee ballots were counted a week later, Nixon won by some 36,000 votes. Democrats never questioned this reversal. Despite intense party pressure, they write, Nixon never contested the election. Major Garrett, who has covered Washington for Fox, CNN, and CBS News, recently said the country is 85% of the way towards a civil war. His new book, with Becker, examines scenarios that might move the country that final 15% of the way. The book is titled The Big Truth, Upholding Democracy in the Age of the Big Lie. Co-authors Major Garrett and David Becker join me now. Major is chief Washington correspondent for CBS News. David is executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. Thank you both for joining me. Major, the book lays out scenarios that might get America those 15 percentage points towards a full-on civil war, God forbid. Talk briefly about the imaginary but not impossible scenario in 2025 or 2023 involving, you say, a dispute over the Texas House delegation.
So let's just imagine a scenario that runs something like this. In Texas on Election Day, there is a dispute, and one of the people involved in the dispute is a poll watcher authorized under Texas law to now go in places that law previously didn't allow, to be more intrusive in looking at how votes are cast and counted there in the precinct. And because Texas law also allows for open carry, this particular person is armed. And first there's an argument, it escalates into a shoving match, and then there's gunfire, and someone dies, a voter. And this becomes an instant viral sensation, as videos of this kind frequently do. And Democrats looking at this say, in addition to this act of violence, and the exact motivations are unclear, but it's an act of violence that ended in death in a polling precinct in Texas, in addition to all the things that have also happened in Texas on that day, long lines, difficulty in communities of color to vote. Democrats say there is something so fundamentally wrong with what's gone on in Texas, how they changed their laws to make voting more difficult because of the big lie in 2020. The Democrats reach a sort of breaking point. Their tolerance has snapped. And the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, says, you know what? We're not going to seat the entire Texas delegation, Democrats and Republicans. And as it turns out, because things are very narrowly drawn across the country, Texas turns out to be quite pivotal in deciding majority control of the House. And so it's suspended in animation. It's sort of held up in the air. And breathlessly, America tries to figure out who runs the House of Representatives because of this underlying dispute. And then Texas responds in kind and says, you know what? If you won't seat our delegation, you can't collect tax revenue from Texas any longer. And other sympathetic states say, you know what? I think we'll join Texas. And then states aligned with Speaker Pelosi say, you know what? We're not going to recognize the rights and the traveling authorities or the business licenses of those states that have pulled back. And gradually, procedurally, on paper, not with bayonets, not with bullets, our country begins to pull apart on ways that are all too familiar already with the way states talk about each other in terms of boycotts over abortion, immigration policy, and the like.
It's interesting that you portray it through kind of Democratic eyes, and you just talked about kind of Democratic tolerance snapping, because we keep talking about Republicans threatening a national divorce, Republicans refusing to accept results, but there will come a point where Democrats say, how much are we going to tolerate of this? It's an interesting and scary vision of the future. David, one of the big truths this book puts forth is that the 2020 election used more paper ballots than any other election in our history. When you hear all this talk about hacked voting machines on the right, how do you respond?
Well, it's just a simple fact. It was the most secure, transparent, and verified election we've ever had in American history. It's a real triumph of American democracy, especially considering the fact that we saw the highest turnout ever by a large margin. Over 20 million more voters showed up to vote in November 2020 than we had ever seen in any election. And we did that all in a global pandemic. It's really a remarkable triumph for all those election officials who managed that. But it's true, 2020 had so much more security than any other election, and it came largely due to those paper ballots. Paper ballots can be verified, they can be audited, they can be recounted. And for the first time in American history, 95% of all Americans voted on paper ballots, including all of the voters in the battleground states. Those paper ballots were audited and in some cases recounted, confirming the results.
I was just going to jump in and say, given what you've recorded, simple facts as you rightly put it, how much faith do you, as an elections expert, election law expert, David, how much faith do you have in the 2022 and 2024 elections? How much faith should we all have?
Oh, I have great faith in the 2022 and 2024 elections. In fact, election officials are getting more and more professional every day. We're at the peak of professionalism in election administration. We have more checks and balances, more redundancies, more transparency, more bipartisanship, more professionalism than ever before. Voters going to vote should know that their votes will be counted and counted accurately. But unfortunately, we have a whole group of individuals led by the former president, the losing presidential candidate, who are telling people the exact opposite.
Major, you've covered Congress and the White House for more than 3 decades, for print publications, for CNN, for Fox, for CBS. How hard is it right now in 2022 to cover an American political scene filled with conspiracy mongers, gaslighters, fake news media haters, QAnon supporting people, a former president who lies like the rest of us breathe? How hard has political journalism become for someone like yourself?
It's a challenge. There's no question about it. And one of the reasons we wrote this book is to lay down a marker, if you will, about what actually happened in this election of 2020. And as David said, we don't ask people to celebrate the margin of victory for Joe Biden if they're a Trump voter. Fine, you're unhappy. Do what every American did before you. Win the next election and devote yourself to the continuance of the American experiment. Don't dismantle it based on, to quote from a movie my children love, a throne of lies. Don't do it. Because if you do, you will incentivize others whom you have political disagreements with to be tempted by the same forces you are falling prey to. And if we ever reach a situation in our country where both parties have stratagems about election denialism, then no one will accept the legitimacy of our elections, and the very foundation of how we make decisions disappears.
David, we can change our laws. We can make sure election posts at the state and county levels are filled, something we discussed on this show recently. But what do you think needs to change in our media coverage of elections and election results and election law? What fixes would you like to see?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think one of the things that needs to change is it's very easy to fall into a paradigm where it's partisan, where the Democrats are good on an issue and the Republicans are bad, or vice versa, depending upon your point of view. And this is a place where in professional election administration, where there are conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats who have done crucial work, and we really need to stand behind them regardless of partisanship. I think another very important thing is we need to set proper expectations. It's very natural for all of us to expect election results at 8:01 p.m. Eastern time on election night. But that's just not realistic. And it's not realistic for a couple of reasons. We have more voters than ever before, but margins are also getting tighter. As margins get tighter, which election officials have no control over, we need to count more and more ballots till we have seen enough and are able to call those races. And especially this year, where we have all new congressional districts and where the expectation is that the control of the House is going to be by a very narrow margin. We could be waiting days or even weeks to find out who won. California takes weeks to count ballots, and some of those House districts in California might take some time to get there. That is normal. That is proper. It means we're taking our time to get it right.
But you have to get ready. You have to get people ready for that. It's a very good point. Major, I have to ask, you're a former Fox employee. When we talk about The Big Truth, your book title, versus The Big Lie, don't we have to acknowledge the massive and pretty unhinged role played by Fox in spreading lies and conspiracies, not just about the election, but about the insurrection too?
It has to be noted, and it will be noted. It's noted by journalist critics. It's noted by those who consume and watch Fox so others don't have to, as the quote go. But also, it is being adjudicated in court. And these lawsuits filed by Smartech and Dominion, the voting companies or machine-making companies, libeled in their view, slandered in their view by Fox or those on Fox, have taken them to court. And those lawsuits are progressing forward. And judges keep saying these will continue. And what the position of those two companies tells me is they're perfectly willing for Discovery to run its course. Look at our things. Is Fox comfortable with Discovery running its course? I don't know, but it doesn't sound like it.
It's fascinating to see that lawsuits, Major, may be the only way to hold a company like Fox to account. And look, it's easy to pick on Fox, but it wasn't just Fox that helped bring us to this point. A lot of people would say that our mainstream media as a whole made a lot of mistakes during the Trump era. The both sidesing, the failure to really hold Trump and some of his acolytes to account. The former CEO of your company infamously said in 2016 about the rise of Trump, it may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. So I ask you, last question, has the US mainstream media learned any lessons from the Trump years?
I think the mainstream media, as it's described, tries to learn lessons all the time. And there are a lot of lessons to be gleaned from the Trump era. And there are those who would argue, and I think there is some credibility to this argument, that
let me tell you the story of Victor Berger. He was an Austro-Hungarian immigrant to the United States, and in 1910, he became the first socialist member of the House, representing Wisconsin's 5th District. He even introduced a bill to provide an old age pension to Americans over the age of 60. It didn't pass. But today we have something very similar called Social Security. After Berger lost his bid for re-election, he began writing editorials against the First World War in the newspaper he owned back in Milwaukee. And there was a huge backlash against him for it, all part of the first Red Scare, widespread anti-left hysteria across the country. Berger was indicted and convicted under the Espionage Act for, quote, disloyal acts. The Supreme Court ultimately overturned his conviction, but not before Congress blocked him from running again while under indictment. The House said, in effect, no, you are accused of being an enemy of the state, so there is no way we are letting you represent this government. A pretty serious move by Congress. He hadn't even been convicted yet. So, why am I telling you about a socialist from 100 years ago? Because Berger was blocked from running under a section of the US Constitution that disqualifies Americans from holding public office at any level if they have engaged in any effort to overthrow the US government. No, really. The 14th Amendment, Section 3, has been used again and again throughout American history. Berger was the last person to be successfully blocked from running for Congress under Section 3. But last week, a New Mexico judge disqualified County Commissioner Couy Griffin, the leader of a group called Cowboys for Trump, from holding public office because of Griffin's role in the January 6th insurrection. Yes, insurrection, a word the judge used. Just removed him from office, the first time that's happened since the end of the Civil War. By joining the mob and trespassing on restricted Capitol grounds, Mr. Griffin contributed to delaying Congress's election certification proceedings, the judge wrote. The ethics watchdog group, Crew, brought the suit against Griffin, presenting video evidence like this in court.
People are ready for fair and legal elections, or this is what you're going to get. You're going to get more of it.
Crew told radio host and MSNBC columnist Dino Badola they are taking a hard look at bringing a similar lawsuit against President Trump. So let's take a closer look at this specific part of our Constitution, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, that could, maybe, might be used to keep Donald Trump from launching a bid for re-election in 2024. It says, quote, no person shall be a senator or
shutdowns. No, we're not going to shut down, and we have to open our schools. And it's like, as an example, I have a young son. He also tested positive. By the time I spoke to the doctor the second time, he was fine. It just went away. Young people, I guess it's their immune system.
Let me follow up with you, President Trump. You've demanded schools open in person and insist they can do it safely. But just yesterday, Boston became the latest city to move its public school system entirely online after a coronavirus spike. What is your message to parents who worry that sending their children to school will endanger not only their kids, but also their teachers and families?
I want to open the schools. The transmittal rate to the teachers is very small, but I want to open the schools. We have to open our country. We're not going to have a country. You can't do this. We can't keep this country closed. This is a massive country with a massive economy. People are losing their jobs. They're committing suicide. There's depression, alcohol, drugs at a level that nobody's ever seen before. There's abuse, tremendous abuse. We have to open our country. You know, I've said it often. The cure cannot be worse than the problem itself. And that's what's happening. And he wants to close down. He'll close down the country if one person in our massive bureaucracy says we should close it down.
Vice President Biden, your
Simply
response.
not true. We ought to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We ought to be able to safely open, but they need resources to open. You need to be able to, for example, if you're going to open a business, have social distancing within the business. You need to have, if you have a restaurant, you need to have plexiglass dividers so people cannot infect one another. You need to be in a position where you can take testing rapidly and know whether a person is in fact infected. You need to be able to trace. You need to be able to provide all the resources that are needed to do this. And that is not inconsistent with saying that what we're going to make sure that we can open safely. And by the way, all you teachers out there, not that many of you are going to die, so don't worry about it. So don't worry about it. Come on.
President Trump, let me follow up with you quickly.
By the way, I will say this. If you go and look at what's happened to New York, it's a ghost town. It's a ghost town. And when you talk about plexiglass, these are restaurants that are dying. These are businesses with no money. Putting up plexiglass is unbelievably expensive, and it's not the answer. I mean, you're going to sit there in a cubicle wrapped around with plastic. These are businesses that are dying, Joe. You can't do that to people. You just can't. Take a look at New York and what's happened to my wonderful city for so many years. I loved it. It was vibrant. It's dying. Everyone's leaving New York.
Take a look at what New York has done in terms of turning the curve down in terms of the number of people dying. And I don't look at this in terms of the way he does. Blue states and red states. They're all the United States. And look at the states that are having such a spike in the coronavirus. They're the red states. They're the states in the Midwest. They're the states in the upper Midwest. That's where the spike is occurring significantly. But they're all Americans. They're all Americans. And what we have to do is say, wear these masks, number one. Make sure we get the help that the businesses need that has money's already been passed to do that. It's been out there since the beginning of the summer, and nothing's happened.
President, New York has lost more than 40,000 people, 11,000 people in nursing homes.
President Trump, what
when you say spike, take a look at what's happening in Pennsylvania, where they've had it closed. Take a look at what's happening with your friend in Michigan, where her husband's the only one allowed to do anything. It's been like a prison. Now it was just ruled unconstitutional. Take a look at North Carolina. They're having spikes, and they've been closed. And they're getting killed financially. We can't let that happen, Joe. You can't let that happen. We have to open up. And we understand the disease. We have to protect our seniors. We have to protect our elderly. We have to protect especially our seniors with heart problems and diabetes problems. And we will protect them. We have the best testing in the world by far. That's why we have so many cases.
Let me follow up with you before we move on to our next section. President Trump, this week you called Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's best-known infectious disease expert, quote, a disaster. You described him and other medical experts as, quote, idiots. If you're not listening to them, who are you listening to as you fight this?
I'm listening to all of them, including Anthony. I get along very well with Anthony. But he did say, don't wear masks. He did say, as you know, this is not going to be a problem. I think he's a Democrat, but that's okay. He said this is not going to be a problem. We are not going to have a problem at all. When Joe says that, I said, Anthony Fauci said, and others, and many others, and I'm not knocking him a lot. Nobody knew. Look, nobody knew what this thing was. Nobody knew where it was coming from, what it was. We've learned a lot. But Anthony said, don't wear masks. Now he wants to wear masks. Anthony also said, if you look back, exact words, here's his exact words. This is no problem. This is going to go away soon. So he's allowed to make mistakes. He happens to be a good person.
Vice President Biden, your response quickly, and then we're going to move on to the next section.
My response is that think about what the president knew in January and didn't tell the American people. He was told this was a serious virus that spread in the air, and it was much worse than the flu. He went on record and said to one of your colleagues, recorded, that in fact he knew how dangerous it was, but he didn't want to tell us. He didn't want to tell us because he didn't want us to panic. He didn't want us. Americans don't panic. He panicked. But guess what? In the meantime, we find out in the New York Times the other day that, in fact, his folks went to Wall Street and said this is a really dangerous thing. And a memo out of that meeting, not from his administration, but from some of the brokers, said sell short because we got to get moving. It's a dangerous problem.
Well, this is
I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond, and then we're going to
Wall Street
move on.
one, I don't know. Somebody went to Wall Street. You're the one that takes all the money from Wall Street. I don't take it. You have raised a lot of money, tremendous amounts of money. And every time you raise money, deals are made, Joe. I could raise so much more money. As president and as somebody that knows most of those people, I could call the heads of Wall Street, the heads of every company in America. I would blow away every record, but I don't want to do that because it puts me in a bad position. And then you bring up Wall Street. You shouldn't be bringing up Wall Street because you're the one that takes the money from Wall Street, not me. I could blow away your records that like you wouldn't believe. We don't need money. We have plenty of money. In fact, we beat Hillary Clinton with a tiny fraction of the money that she was able to.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to move on.
Don't tell me about Wall Street.
Average contribution, $43.
All right, we're going to move on to our next section, which is national security. And I do want to start with the security of our elections and some breaking news from overnight. Just last night, top intelligence officials confirmed again that both Russia and Iran are working to influence this election. Both countries have obtained U.S. voter registration information, these officials say, and Iran sent intimidating messages to Florida voters. This question goes to you, Mr. Vice President. What would you do to put an end to this threat? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
I made it clear, and I ask everyone else to take the pledge. I made it clear that any country, no matter who it is, that interferes in American elections will pay a price. They will pay a price. And it's been overwhelmingly clear this election, I won't even get into the last one, this election, that Russia has been involved, China has been involved to some degree, and now we learn that Iran is involved. They will pay a price if I'm elected. They're interfering with American sovereignty. That's what's going on right now. They're interfering with American sovereignty. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't think the president said anything to Putin about it. I don't think he's talking to them a lot. I don't think he said a word. I don't know why he hadn't said a word to Putin about it. And I don't know what he has recently said, if anything, to the Iranians. My guess is he'd probably be more outspoken with regard to the Iranians. But the point is this, folks. We are in a situation where we have foreign countries trying to interfere in the outcome of our election. His own national security advisor told him that what is happening with his buddy, I will. His buddy, Rudy Giuliani, he's being used as a Russian pawn. He's being fed information that is Russian, that is not true. And then what happens? Nothing happens. And then you find out that everything that's going on here about Russia is wanting to make sure that I do not get elected the next president of the United States because they know I know them and they know me. I don't understand why this president is unwilling to take on Putin when he's actually paying bounties to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan, when he's engaged in activities that are trying to destabilize all of NATO. I don't know why he doesn't do it, but it's worth asking the question, why isn't that being done? Any country that interferes with us will, in fact, pay a price because they're affecting our sovereignty.
President Trump, same question to you. Let me ask the question. You're going to have 2 minutes to respond. For 2 elections in a row now, there has been substantial interference from foreign adversaries. What would you do in your next term to put an end to this? 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Well, let me respond to the first part as Joe answered. Joe got $3.5 million from Russia, and it came through Putin because he was very friendly with the former mayor of Moscow, and it was the mayor of Moscow's wife. And you got $3.5 million. Your family got $3.5 million. And you know, someday you're going to have to explain why did you get 3.5. I never got any money from Russia. I don't get money from Russia. Now, about your thing last night, I knew all about that. And through John Ratcliffe, who is fantastic, DNI, he said the one thing that's common to both of them, they both want you to lose because there has been nobody tougher to Russia. Between the sanctions, nobody tougher than me on Russia. Between the sanctions, between all of what I've done with NATO, you know, I've got the NATO countries to put up an extra $130 billion, going to $420 billion a year. That's to guard against Russia. I sold, while he was selling pillows and sheets, I sold tank busters to Ukraine. There has been nobody tougher on Russia than Donald Trump. And I'll tell you, they were so bad. They took over the submarine port. You remember that very well. During your term, during you and Barack Obama, they took over a big part of what should have been Ukraine. You handed it to them, but you were getting a lot of money from Russia. They were paying you a lot of money, and they probably still are. But now, with what came out today, it's even worse. All of the emails, the horrible emails of the kind of money that you were raking in, you and your family. And Joe, you were vice president when some of this was happening. And it should have never happened. And I think you owe an explanation to the American people. Why is it? Somebody just had a news conference a little while ago who was essentially supposed to work with you and your family, but what he said was damning. And regardless of me, I think you have to clean it up and talk to the American people. Maybe you can do it right now.
Vice President Biden, you may respond. 30
straight
seconds.
here.
And then I do want to follow up on the election security.
I have not taken a penny from any foreign source ever in my life. We learned that this president paid 50 times the tax in China, has a secret bank account with China, does business in China, and in fact is talking about me taking money. I have not taken a single penny from any country whatsoever, ever. Number one. Number two, this is a president, I have released all of my tax returns, 22 years. Go look at them. 22 years of my tax return. You have not released a single solitary year of your tax return. What are you hiding? Why are you unwilling? The foreign countries are paying you a lot. Russia's paying you a lot. China's paying you a lot. And your hotels and all your businesses all around the country, all around the world. And China's building a new road to a new a golf course you have overseas. So what's going on here? Why don't release your tax return or stop talking about corruption?
President Trump, your response.
First of all, I called my accountants under audit. I'm going to release them as soon as we can. I want to do it, and it'll show how successful, how great this company is. But much more importantly than that, people were saying $750. I asked them a week ago, I said, what did I pay? They said, sir, you prepaid tens of millions of dollars. I prepaid my tax. Tens over the last number of years. Tens of millions of dollars I prepaid because at some point they think it's an estimate. They think I may have to pay tax. So I already prepaid it. Nobody told me that.
Did your accountant
Nobody
tell
told
when
you that.
could release
Excuse
them?
me. And it wasn't written whenever they write this. They keep talking about $750, which I think is a filing fee. But let me just tell you, I prepaid millions and millions of dollars in taxes. Number one. Number two, I don't make money from China. You do. I don't make money from Ukraine. You do. I don't make money from Russia. You made $3.5 million, Joe, and your son gave you. They even have a statement that we have to give 10% to the big man. You're the big man, I think. I don't know. Maybe you're not, but you're the big man, I think. Your son said we have to give 10% to the big man. Joe, what's that all about? It's terrible.
All right, gentlemen, I want to ask you both some questions about all of this, but I'm going to let you both respond very quickly. You just said you spoke to your accountant about potentially releasing your taxes. Did he tell you when you can release them? Do you have a deadline for when you're going to release them to the American people?
I get treated worse than the Tea Party got treated. Because I have a lot of people in there, deep down in the IRS, they treat me horribly. We made a deal, it was all settled until I decide to run for president. I get treated very badly by the IRS, very unfairly. But we had a deal all done. As soon as we're completed with the deal, I want to release it. But I have paid millions and millions of dollars, and it's worse than paying. I paid in advance. It's called prepaying your taxes. I paid in advance.
I want to ask you both about questions regarding your potential foreign entanglements and questions that have been raised to give you both a chance to talk about this more broadly. Respond very quickly, and then I'll get to my question.
Why did he's been saying this for 4 years? Show us. Just show us. Stop playing around. You've been saying for 4 years you're going to release your taxes. Nobody knows it, Mr. President. What they do know is you're not paying your taxes, or you're paying taxes that are so low. When last time he said what he paid, he said, I only pay that little because I'm smart. I know how to game the system. Come on. Come on, folks.
Very quickly, President Trump, and then I want to get to two questions to both of you on this.
I was put through a phony witch hunt for 3 years. It started before I even got elected. They spied on my campaign. No president should ever have to go through what I went through. Let me just say this. Mueller and 18 angry Democrats and FBI agents all over the place spent $48 million. They went through everything I had, including my tax returns, and they found absolutely no collusion and nothing wrong. $48 million. I guarantee you, if I spent $1 million on you, Joe, I could find plenty wrong. Because the kind of things that you've done and the kind of monies that your family has taken, I mean, your brother made money in Iraq. millions of dollars. Your other brother made a fortune, and it's all through you, Joe. And they say you get some of it, and you do live very well. You have houses all over the place. You live very well.
All right, gentlemen, let me just ask some questions.
Avancez s'il vous plaît d'avant. Allez.
Je sais comment ça va.
Now we've got the Democratic nominee for New York's 10th Congressional District, Dan Goldman. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. It's great to be here.
So you're in a pretty unique situation because most candidates for office haven't already been front and center in an impeachment trial. You were the lead counsel for Trump's first impeachment, so you've got pretty good insight into his criminality. Do you believe that he'll testify for the January 6th committee?
No, I think there's pretty much no chance he will. I think he will pretend as if he wants to, just like he did with the Mueller investigation. And ultimately, he'll then come up with some reason blaming, the committee or other, something else as to why, I would, but I couldn't possibly because of their bias or whatever it is. I hope the January 6th committee calls his bluff and says, you want to come testify live? No problem. You can come testify however you want to testify, because he won't.
What are the consequences?
を変えました。これは過度な献金や霊感商法の被害などはこの対象にはならないとしていたのをやっぱり対象になるかもしれないというふうに変えたということなんですね。これらについて教団は会見で次のように話しています。
16 days and counting. A brand new NBC News poll just released this morning gives us new.
Ce drapeau est aujourd'hui le symbole de la terreur.
Okay, you ready?
Ready, start whenever.
All right. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? So I'm here with my good friend Patty.
Thanks, Forrest.
A fellow content creator. If you guys are living under a rock, which I hope you guys aren't, Patty runs a YouTube channel called Thai Talk with Patty. When I was stuck in California during the height of COVID, I was binging on nothing but Thai content, but I was binging on a lot of your content, and I was really impressed that a non-Thai such as yourself is so damn fluent in speaking Thai.
สิ่งที่ชอบมากที่สุดเกี่ยวกับประเทศของคุณร้องหน่อยได้ไหมครับร้องนี่เมื่อกี้ที่ซิดนีย์แล้วก็มาอยู่ที่บ้านพัดดี้ด้วยใช่ปาร์ตี้ทุกวันเลยOh, thanks for that, Forrest, and thanks for watching the content. I'm sorry for wasting so much of your hours.
It's hours well worth wasted. And if anything, that actually inspired me to actually want to come back. That just motivated me to actually just come back here to Thailand as soon as possible, learn the language, as soon as possible. And you've actually inspired me to actually start taking classes and just, trying to use Thai as much as I can.
I'm so glad you feel that way, honestly, because that's a big part of the reason why I do the channel. Hopefully, even I can just be a little bit of an inspiration to people learning any language, regardless of whether it's Thai or English or another language, then that's kind of the whole point of the channel, and getting out there and getting outside your comfort zone. So yeah.
Exactly, because I don't want to end up becoming a 20-year expat living here in Thailand and not speaking the lick of Thai.
Yeah,
that shit is embarrassing.
Unfortunately, there is that exists. That exists.
If you guys follow Patty's content, you left Australia after being there for so many years. You've actually been here for a couple months so far.
So I previously lived in Thailand in 2014 for about 9 or 10 months. And when I was there, I obviously, as you can tell from the videos, fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the language. I met so many local friends here. And I went back to Australia and kind of did the normal thing. You go to university, you get a job, and I worked within a company, and I actually still do.
Monica Bellucci. Ciao Monica, come stai? Grazie. Sinceramente devo dire che io penso che tutti gli italiani in questo momento mi stanno invidiando da morire. Grazie di essere venuta.
No, ma guarda, io devo dire che è la prima volta che mi trovo in una situazione.
Primetime game shows.
中国共产党的指
You look at the polling, you talk to reporters, they are nervous about the economy.
Air Warriors.
Time now for our weekend briefing. There are just over 2 weeks left.
Welcome back to Face.
Turning now overseas, the president of Ukraine warned today that Russia is planning to blow up a dam at a hydroelectric plant near the Russian-occupied city of Kherson, and that would trigger a large-scale disaster. And there was a rare phone call today between U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and his Russian counterpart. It was their first conversation since May. Now, just over the border in Romania, CBS News was given exclusive access to the Army's 101st Airborne Division as they are deployed to Europe for the first time since the last World War. CBS's Charlie D'Agata is there.
They're America's go-to combat troops.
Go, 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 go!
The soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division, now the closest U.S. forces to the fight in Ukraine. We joined Colonel Edwin Mathaidis and Brigadier General John Lubis on board a Black Hawk helicopter where we flew along the coast of the Black Sea, across those same waters from Russian-held territory in Ukraine, including Crimea.
What is the what-if? What are you preparing for? We got two major tasks, right? To assure our allies and deter our adversaries from doing anything.
Fully aware those adversaries have eyes on everything this close.
Is that part of it? That's the entire part of it. That's the whole deter aspect, right? They know that we're here. They know that we're ready.
We're just coming within 3.5 miles of the Ukrainian border. In fact, that city behind us is in Ukraine. We're right on the edge of NATO territory.
We reach a forward operating site to watch forces.
Días, señor presidente. Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Klasse.
We are going to proceed